Hello and welcome back to the Cyber Resiliency Summit here at theCUBE. My name is Bertrand, Principal Analyst. My focus is cyber resiliency and I'm with theCUBE Research. I'm very, very pleased to welcome on this segment Roger Grimes, who is from KnowBe4. And Roger, you have the best title in the world. You guys at KnowBe4 really know how to do this. Tell us what your title is, tell us what you do, and then let's talk a little bit about KnowBe4, and I'd like to get into some of the great statistics that we had a chance to discuss right before this segment.
Yeah, sure. My name is Roger Grimes. I've been doing cybersecurity for over 36 years. I've written 14 books and over 1,400 articles on cybersecurity. I am the data-driven defense evangelist for KnowBe4, and it's really to point out that a lot of stuff in cybersecurity, what's funny is cybersecurity is supposed to protect the data, but we don't use data to really drive how we defend ourselves. So I created the title. I just made it up out of thin air, data-driven defense evangelist, to really discuss and push how we need to have better data and more data around how we're most likely to be compromised, and use that data like an insurance actuary to kind of push what cyber defenses we should be using instead of relying upon a gut feeling or something. And let me say, gut feeling is great. A lot of times you're right, but it really is good to have good data that backs up your gut feeling when you go to fight hackers and malware.
Right, and I think what's happened in the market, I come from the IT infrastructure side of things, backup recovery, disaster recovery. So what I've seen is obviously security is a key set of features you have to have in those environments. But I've seen really the sort of conflation of markets. Cybersecurity meets backup recovery, meets data management. That's why we came up with cyber resiliency, which seems to capture a lot of this. But it's also creating, for the IT professionals and security professionals watching us, a bit of confusion and complexity. How to handle all of these issues and how to effectively and efficiently minimize the risk. You mentioned an actuarial view of cybersecurity. I totally agree. It's about risk and really business risk. So one of the things that's interesting, and I know in what you guys do, is you really focus on the humans. You focus on the risks associated with individuals potentially being part of the problem, and more importantly, the ability to be part of the solution. So can you walk us through some of the statistics you've gathered around social engineering? Because I think that's really the heart of the problem in many ways.
Yeah, since the beginning of computers, social engineering has been the number one way by far that devices and networks and environments are compromised. Social engineering, and in particular email phishing, but all types of social engineering, is involved in about 70 to 90% of all successful data breaches. 70 to 90%, it's almost all of it. Nothing else really even comes close. No other root hacking cause comes close, although the closest one is unpatched software and firmware. That's involved in about 33% of attacks. Those two things together, social engineering and unpatched software, account for 90 to 99% of the risk in most organizations. If an organization gets compromised by a hacker, malware, ransomware, something like that, odds are it's usually involves social engineering, can involve some unpatched software, something like that. And then everything else besides social engineering and patching, everything else added up all together doesn't even account for 10% of the risk. And really, as I tell people, if you got one cause like social engineering that's 70 to 90% of the problem, and you're not trying to effectively mitigate it, the rest doesn't really matter.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what's interesting here is the fact that, we've maybe been used to, leveraging technology too much. We've got great, detection, we've got response technologies, we've got all of that in place, we've got backup and recovery, and we've relied on technology. And what I'm hearing you say is, well, that's great, but the truth is, social engineering is the most important problem you have in terms, at least, of statistics. And I like numbers. I'm a research guy. I believe in numbers. So let's walk through that. And why is it that people, humans, are the problem in many ways here? What do you think is going on? And let's maybe also talk about spear phishing and other fun things in this topic.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the reasons why social engineering is so targeted is that it is so successful for so long. I mean, we're talking, going on 4 decades, social engineering's been used to compromise people as the number one problem, and it works. And if I try something else, like if I'm going to do some sort of like vulnerability exploit or write malware, well, maybe that exploit or malware maybe works on Windows. Maybe it goes off, maybe it causes a warning, maybe it doesn't work on Macs or Linux or something like that. But if I ask you, if I trick you, I send you an email pretending to be somebody that you might log into, and I ask for your login name and password, and you're tricked to inputting that, well, that works whether you're using Windows or Mac or Linux or Chrome OS, right? So it's easier to perform. It gets past all your technical tools and your firewalls, your antivirus. There's all these things that we put on our user devices and networks that are trying to stop the bad guy from getting on in. But if they can sneak on in past all those defenses in a simple email where they're asking the user something, or they trick the user into clicking on something, then it bypasses all those technical defenses. And I guess, so I've been in the cybersecurity industry since 1987, and I keep waiting for us to come up with this, perfect defense that stops all of this stuff. Like, you keep hearing people saying, well, we're going to detect all the viruses, or we're going to detect all the ransomware, or we're going to block all the content. And we're saying we've had some really big organizations try to do it, like Microsoft and Google, that have spent hundreds of millions to billions of dollars for decades, and it still gets through. I think the latest stat I saw said something like 1 out of every 7, malicious emails or emails with a malware in it or something like that still gets by every defense. And some people will say, well, we need to come up with this technical defense that stops everything. And I agree, right? If you can stop that badness from getting to the end user, that's better than the end user having to look at something and make a security decision. It'd be better if we could block it technically. But let's think about it. Social engineering is 70 to 90% of successful attacks today, and that's after it's gone past every technical defense that we've tried to put in its way. So it's highly successful, highly effective, not that difficult for the hacker to change. Like, if we come up with a technical defense that blocks something, like on malware or something, maybe we come up with the definition. All of a sudden, we're blocking all this malware or something like that. With social engineering, the attacker just needs to change the subject line and change the approach with the social engineering, and all of a sudden, it's getting past all of those content filters. It's just amazingly successful. Or here's a stat that has blown me away since I read it last year. It's from Barracuda Networks. Barracuda Networks says that spear phishing, by the way, spear phishing is a type of, so, phishing in general is trying to trick somebody into doing something that they shouldn't do that's against their own interest. Spear phishing is when the hacker is trying to specifically target you or a group of people you belong to, maybe, like C-level employees at a company, and or they have some information that they've learned about you. Maybe you're working on a particular project or something like that, that maybe is not public information. So spear phishing is when the attacker is using social engineering phishing to target you or group that you're in, and they may or may not have information that's kind of non-public that kind of gives a little bit more legitimacy to the scam. Like, maybe they're saying, hey, here's a document related to that project we're working on. And maybe you don't recognize the email address right away, but they've included the right project, the name of the project or something like that. So you're like, oh, okay, it's somebody that's on the project, and you click and open the document. Well, spear phishing, and again, this comes from Barracuda Networks. Barracuda Networks said that although spear phishing is only involved in less than 0.1% of all email attacks, it's responsible for 66%, 2/3 of all successful data breaches. And if you read that statistic, and let me say there's a ton of other, and let me say there's a ton of other data that backs up that conclusion that spear phishing is responsible for a large portion of the hacking, majority of the hacking that we're seeing. When you see and read that statistic, and you don't say to yourself as a cybersecurity defender, hey, we need to do something different. We need to train our users and how to recognize spear phishing. We need to explain to them the importance of recognizing spear phishing, because if we don't, we could become, the next ransomware victim.
Right. So I think this brings up a couple of questions and points here. First of all, in general terms for social engineering and spear phishing, what have you noticed with AI? Obviously, that has become an amazing tool for even your average bad guy to be a lot smarter, to maybe even mimic somebody's voice, for example, to trick you into doing something. So do you think that AI has maybe accelerated or emphasized some of these type of attacks?
Yeah, and let me say, I think there's a couple of main issues. Number one is when attackers are using a, excuse me, couple of things. When the attacker is using AI-enabled attack tools, it allows them to have better looking social engineering and phishing attacks. I think, a lot of us for probably 2 or 3 decades, when we got some sort of spam or social engineering, it would a lot of times have typos in it. The language would be weird, and that's because many times the attackers are coming from countries where our language is not their first language. And so the way that they try to communicate with us seems kind of awkward. It has weird typos in it, that sort of stuff. So the AI-enabled tools allow the attacker to not only craft better looking, more realistic social engineering scams, and this is the part that I think is kind of scary. This second part, which is allows them, if the person then responds and asks a question, it's really easy for the attacker to respond very quickly. Again, in that victim's native language, saying something that's kind of realistic sounding. And different industries, like whether if you're in the hospitality hotel industry versus the medical hospital industry, there's different types of terminology that are used in different industries, and these AI tools allow an attacker to be able to use words that maybe only an insider in that industry might know. Like, with a hotel person, they could approach them and talk about the census. We have some, I need to ask you about the latest census, which would mean how many people are checked into the hotel and that sort of stuff. Well, that's not a term that most of us would know off the top of our head if we didn't work in the industry. Certainly not if we worked in another country or something like that. We might not even use the same terminology. So AI, one of the biggest, things is that AI allows the attacker, the foreign attacker, to craft these realistic looking scams that don't have the typos and the language issues, and also again to respond to us in near real time when we, the victim, are starting to go, oh, I missed this invoice. Well, how come you didn't submit this invoice to our normal invoicing system? And it allows that attacker to respond kind of in a realistic way, or more realistic than they would have without it. And then back to your first point, is that it allows them to mimic being, whoever they want to be, so regardless of who they really are in real life, this young kid somewhere in another country that doesn't speak your language, AI allows them to pretend to be anybody and to say and write anything. As a matter of fact, I tell people about AI. There are hundreds and hundreds of AI tools on the internet that help you make what's called deep fakes. Deep fakes are where you're creating audio or video or a picture of someone saying or doing something that they're not really doing. Deep fake. There's hundreds of these tools on the internet that you can access for free. And I tell people it takes me longer to sign up for the free account with my login name and password and what other information they want for the free account than it does for me to create a deep fake of you saying and doing anything. I literally only need a picture of you, maybe 6 seconds to a minute of audio of you, and I can make a deep fake audio video of you saying and doing anything. And then just imagine that power is in the hands of all these people that want to scam you and trick you into doing something. They can pretend to be your boss. They can pretend to be somebody from the police department. They can pretend to be a friend. I see every day, I see these AI deepfake technologies that are so good at faking and pretending being other people, even conversing in real time. Like if you were to ask me a question, there's deepfake technologies today that can literally respond as I'm responding. Like I could say, yes, I'm Roger Grimes. and the deep fake audio and video software would take it and respond and turn that response, my face, maybe it puts long hair and turns me into a female and has me say in the voice of that person whatever it is I'm saying. And that's what we have today. That's what you can get for free, and it's just getting better every day.
Right, and that's why the statistics are probably not going to get any better. So I want to assure our viewers that it's really me and it's really you, okay? This is all real.
Yeah.
And the one thing, though, that I think is important is, look, a lot of our viewers, they're IT professionals, they're security professionals, they work, in a number of sort of technology areas. So do you see, from your standpoint, that IT professionals are an even more prized sort of type of target for some of these bad guys because of their responsibility, because of their access to the data in the organization, to the IP, to the systems?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we see attackers target IT people, IT security people. Like if they're starting to do this scam, they're trying to break into an organization and steal money or intellectual property or something. One of the most common things they'll do is compromise the IT security people's accounts, their email accounts, their Slack accounts or whatever, start monitoring their computers, start monitoring what they're doing. And they're doing keyword searches to say, hey, is IT security on to us? Is somebody reporting this scam? Is somebody, reporting this particular email scam or this file? A lot of times they're placing files out on the network and ransomware and stuff. They absolutely will monitor the IT people, IT security people to see if they're being reported as having done, potentially something suspicious. They also love to compromise, as you said, their accounts because they oftentimes have the keys to the kingdom and can access a lot more. It's funny, like, if they compromise the CEO, they actually can get to a lot of important intellectual property, but the CEO typically doesn't have access to every file and folder on the entire network. But an IT manager, or administrator might have that sort of access. So, what we see is they are typically absolutely excited to try to compromise somebody at the C levels in the organization, because again, those people have access to intellectual property, keys to some way of getting the money and bank accounts, and then IT security people because of their access to different systems where they can download more content, intellectual property, and get to a lot more content that reveals other things, including like passwords and that sort of stuff. So, absolutely. I mean, let me say that attackers are happy to compromise anybody. They'll take anybody's desktop and then use that as a launch pad to try to take over the whole organization. But if they can get to an IT person's desktop, that allows them just to move that much more quicker throughout the organization. That's one less step. A lot of times they're trying to get from a regular person to some type of IT or service account. If they can start off at that level, well, that's one less, activity they have to do.
Right. So I think that's a very important message, for our viewers. If you're in IT or security or both, you are a prime target. You probably already know that, but I think it bears repeating. The other thing I'd like for us to talk about is, okay, well, this clearly is a bad situation we're in, and that's just a reality. So what do we do next? What can we do to mitigate the problems here, to mitigate the exposure and the risks incurred by users and IT professionals being targeted? Maybe we should talk a little bit about training and really security awareness training. So what's your take? What do you do? And what do you recommend to really optimize not only training and awareness, but really minimize risks at the end of the day? Because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, the first thing I think is, communicating and educating people involved all the way from the board of directors. You have board of the directors all the way down to the, average end user. Most people know that social engineering and phishing and things like that is kind of in our face, and we see it all the time. And then people are trying to scam us on our phones and at home. But most people don't realize that it's easily the single largest thing. Most CEOs, most board of directors don't know that social engineering and phishing accounts for 70 to 90% of attacks. When I've been in boardrooms, I think the average board of director thinks that the number one problem is unpatched software. And let me say that is a big problem, but it's number two, and it's only 33% of the problem. The much larger problem is social engineering. So I think step number one is to educate everybody involved about what a big risk social engineering and phishing is. That's getting people to understand the importance. And the average company doesn't even spend 5% of their IT security resources to fight social engineering. So it's 70 to 90% of the problem. The average organization isn't spending 5% to fight it. And it's that fundamental misalignment between how we're most likely to be attacked and how we're concentrating and defending that allows the attackers and their malware creations to be so long-term successful. And as long as we have that misalignment in how we're responding, hackers and malware are going to continue to be successful. And so what we want to encourage people to reduce human risk is to start to use security awareness training as a major part of reducing human risk. There's a lot of other ways to reduce human risk, but I would say one of the biggest and most successful ways to reduce human risk is to do security awareness training, which means you're making people, again, be aware of the threat of social engineering. You're giving them examples of common types of social engineering attacks. You're teaching them how to recognize what a social engineering attack looks like. You're giving them tools to easily report suspicious social engineering attacks. So, you're trying to say, hey, if you see this, see these signs, there's a good chance it could be social engineering. You want to stop, think, look. You want to report it to this, this particular way. Click on this icon, report it to the help desk, make this phone call. So it's a little bit of both there. And if you can do that, and let me say, you have to aggressively do that. We consider an effective security awareness training program one to be where the end users getting training some sort, even if it's only a few minutes, at least once a month, and getting what we call simulated phishing attacks, where you're teaching them about something that's related to social engineering and phishing, and then you're sending them at some, another week or two later, a month later, or whatever it might be, you're sending them a simulated phishing attack and seeing how well they respond. And if they respond in a negative way, meaning they click on the link or they try to download a file or they provide their login credentials or something, that they get some immediate education, some immediate education where they're like, hey, these are the things you should have seen in this message that should have told you that it was potentially a suspicious phishing email. And let me say, we have some really good data to back up how good social engineering or security awareness training is. The average organization globally is about 20 to 40% likely to be compromised in a given year, where the average stat is actually somewhat closer to 40%. So 40% of organizations get compromised by hackers or malware or ransomware in a given year. Only 2.37%, so less than 3% of our customers have ever been compromised ever in the history of them being our customers. So, I mean, that's pretty startling. That's a really startling statistic. Only 2.37% of our customers have ever been compromised. And customers that were previously breached and compromised are far less likely to be breached and compromised once they are our customers. So it really shows you the value of having an effective security awareness training program and reducing human risk.
I'm convinced. I mean, I think it's very obvious. As I think a reasonably savvy user, I know I've been through many security trainings, especially in larger organizations, and frankly, I don't know if they were that useful because you take it once and kind of forget about it. But I would agree that definitely this frequency, this monthly frequency sounds like a great idea. The simulations, the training, focusing on the end user as well as the IT professionals. It sounds like, there's a lot of work ahead, but it's also clearly a way to improve. And the statistics you've just quoted are very, very interesting. Because, by the way, this is money, right? This is a reduction of business risk. This is a reduction of cost, potentially, because anytime you get breached or you have an issue, you immediately have to think about compliance and fines and a bunch of other things. And, of course, just the operational costs of having any sort of business downtime. Look, we've covered a lot of ground. Roger, I'd like to ask you, what recommendation do you have for our viewers? What would be the one thing that you would ask them to go do right after they watch this segment?
I would say, again, communicate how important it is to mitigate social engineering and phishing, and making sure that you're doing the security awareness training effectively. There really is nothing more important. There's no other, there's lots of things you're being told to do. I mean, the average cybersecurity recommendation document has over 200 controls. There is nothing more important than educating people how to recognize and mitigate and report social engineering. That is the number one best thing you can do. And we need to do it more effectively. Like you said, once a year doesn't work. That's looking at our data. If you're only trained once a year, it's almost the same as not being trained at all. If we were trying to teach, kids how to cross a road, or young teenagers how to drive a car or something, we wouldn't just teach them once a year. You have to teach it more often, something closer to once a month. We'd say that training, again, needs to be once a month. Simulated phishing attacks at least once a month, if not more, because again, it's the largest problem and we need to start treating it that way.
Right, and we've spent a lot of time in this summit talking about technology, but clearly here we're getting the full 360 view. The humans are key. Social engineering is the biggest issue statistically, and of course you need technology for a bunch of other things, but this message I think is very powerful and very important. So Roger, thank you so much for joining us. It was great getting your perspective and these great statistics.
Yeah, thank you.
And to our viewers, stay tuned for other segments in our Cyber Resiliency Summit. My name is Bertrand, Principal Analyst here at theCUBE Research. Stay tuned.